Hotep, everybody. This is Michael Imhotep, founder of the African History Network and host of the African History Network show. It is Sunday, April 28th, 2024. April is almost gone. May is almost here. Next thing you know, it'll be June and we'll be celebrating Juneteenth. Welcome to the African History Network show. We are live today and we have an exciting show planned for you. Share this broadcast on your social media platforms. Invite your friends to tune in. I talked about two of the topics that we're going to discuss today. We talked about on Roland Martin Unfiltered when I was on Friday, April 26th. And we did an update on the story of Crystal Mason. Crystal Mason is the African-American woman in Texas who in 2016 voted by a provisional ballot. And because she was a former felon, she was ineligible to vote, but nobody told her that she could not vote. Okay. And she was, we know in March of 2024, her conviction was overturned by a second district appeals court in Texas. But now you have a Texas district attorney who wants that the appeals court ruling to be overturned, and he wants to send her to prison. So we have an update on that story, and we talked to one of Crystal's attorneys, attorney Kim Cole, on Roland Martin Unfiltered. But there were some things that I wanted to say that I did not get a chance to say in that segment. So we're going to talk about it on today's show. And then also, we talked about Vice President Kamala Harris' economic opportunity tour that's coming up starting Monday, April 29th in Atlanta. Then it's coming to Detroit the following week, and it's going to hit some other cities. Okay, this is something that's huge, and the Biden-Harris administration is going to talk about what they've accomplished so far in this administration, talk about things that they have done to help people economically, but also talk about connecting people, especially African Americans, to economic opportunities. 11 Alive has an article dealing with this. There's also information at whitehouse.gov on this topic as well. So we're going to share that information with you, and it's going to dispel a lot of myths dealing with the Biden-Harris administration's policies not helping African Americans, all types of nonsense like that. That's just blatantly false. That's just blatantly false. So we'll provide you with some information dealing with that. I'm going to find out where she's going to be when it comes to Detroit, because I'm going to try to attend that. And then lastly, there was an article that I saw from Black Enterprise, blackenterprise.com. And Black Enterprise has an article dealing with how African Americans have had $600 billion stolen from us in unfair taxes. $600 billion stolen from us in unfair taxes. And this is after slavery ended. Okay. And this is something that I've talked about numerous times before. And historically, one of the ways that land was stolen from us was through over assessing property taxes. Okay. Over assessing property taxes. And then we could not pay the exorbitant property taxes. And then we lose our land. We know here in the city of Detroit, $600 million. And African Americans, homeowners were over assessed $600 million in property taxes over a number of years here recently here in Detroit. Okay, and a lot of people lost their homes because of the over assessment in property taxes. Okay, so we'll talk about those stories, and we'll give you some information on the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays: Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Now, on the African History Network show, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Because right now it's correct wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man or woman's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his or her actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. All right, I want to jump into the first story here. And, Friday's edition, the Friday, April 26th edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. It started late, so we had a shorter show, and some of the segments I did not get a chance to talk more and talk about some of the things that make some other points that I wanted to make. So if we look here at this story dealing with Crystal Mason, okay, I want to give you a little background information and then talk about this update. All right, so there was an article from NBCnews.com on March 28th, 2024. March 28th, 2024. Texas woman's prison sentence for attempting to vote illegally is thrown out. Texas woman's prison sentence for attempting to vote illegally is thrown out. The state appeals court ruling ends a years-long saga that garnered national attention. All right. So in this piece from NBC News, now here's a picture of Crystal Mason, okay, African-American woman. It says a Texas appeals court tossed out a woman's 5-year prison sentence for voting illegally on Thursday, March 28th, 2024, ending a years-long saga that garnered national attention. Crystal Mason was sentenced in 2018 to 5 years in prison after she testified she did not know that she was ineligible to vote because she was convicted of tax fraud in 2011. She cast a provisional ballot in the 2016 presidential election with the help of a poll worker. Okay. Now, in Thursday, March 28th, 2024, in Thursday's ruling to overturn Crystal Mason's sentence, Second District Court of Appeals Justice Wade Birdwell wrote that, quote, finding Crystal Mason to be not credible and disbelieving her protestation of actual knowledge does not suffice as proof of guilt. Now, Crystal Mason testified that when she was in prison, she was not informed that she could not vote upon her release, Judge Birdwell said. Justice Wade Birdwell said. She was not informed that she could not vote upon her release. She also, quote, emphatically denied having read the provisional ballot's affirmations detailing felon voting restrictions, testifying that she did not know she was not allowed to cast a ballot because she was on supervised release from prison, according to Judge Birdwell. Now, Crystal Mason's provisional ballot was not counted. Her provisional ballot was not counted when officials determined that she was ineligible to vote because of her 2011 conviction, the ruling said. Quote, in the end, the state's primary evidence was that Crystal Mason read the words on the affidavit, end quote, Judge Birdwell said. Quote, but even if she had read them, okay, now this is critical here to the overturning of her case, overturning of her conviction. But even if she had read them, they are not sufficient, even in the context of the rest of the evidence in this case, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, that she actually knew that being on supervised release, after having served her entire federal sentence of incarceration made her ineligible to vote by casting a provisional ballot when she did so. So them not believing Crystal Mason is not enough evidence. The prosecution did not meet their burden of proof to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that she actually knew that she was not eligible to vote. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, not the defense. Okay, so even in the context of the rest of the evidence in this case, to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Crystal Mason actually knew that being on supervised release after having served her entire federal sentence of incarceration made her ineligible to vote by casting a provisional ballot when she did so. Okay. Now, the Court of Criminal Appeals announced in 2021 that it would consider an appeal from Crystal Mason, who was out of prison on an appeal bond. Out of prison on an appeal bond. Her 2018 sentence drew national attention, and critics have rallied against the lower court's decision. All right. So, March 28th, we get news that her sentence was overturned. All right. And she thought that she could put all of this behind her and move on with her life. Well, we talked about on Friday, April 26th on Roland Martin Unfiltered, that a Texas district attorney, Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells, Sorrells, he's not satisfied, and he wants to persecute Crystal Mason some more. Okay, so there's an article from TexasTribune.org, TexasTribune.org, and I want to pull that piece up here. Tarrant County DA wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated. All right, now keep in mind that this provisional ballot that she cast was not counted, but they still want her to serve a prison sentence for what they call illegally voting. Okay, so here's the latest development in this case, and all this is designed by a former Confederate state, a former state that was part of the Confederacy that took up arms to preserve slavery, and then passed laws to suppress the African American vote after Reconstruction ends in 1877. This is all geared toward suppressing the African American vote today. Tarrant County DA wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated. Now, this article is from April 25th, 2024. Here's another picture of Crystal Mason as well. Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated, his office announced on Thursday, April 25th, 2024. Crystal Mason, a Tarrant County resident, was acquitted of an illegal voting charge on March 28th, 2024. Tarrant County District Attorney Phil Sorrells' office is now asking the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to overturn the ruling that cleared her. Now, Crystal Mason was convicted of illegal voting in March 2018 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for casting a provisional ballot in the 2016 presidential election while on supervised release for federal tax evasion. Quote, "This office will protect the ballot from fraudsters who think our laws don't apply to them," District Attorney Phil Sorrells' office said in a statement. So they're trying to further criminalize her by referring to her as a fraudster. Now, this office, the District Attorney's office argues, the Second Court of Appeals did not give proper deference to the trial court's guilty verdict, and reweighed the evidence in favor of Crystal Mason when it overturned her conviction. Now, District Attorney Sorrell's office adds, Crystal Mason was fairly convicted based on testimony from election staff that she understood she was not eligible to vote. But Crystal Mason's attorney, one of her attorneys, Kim T. Cole, on Roland Martin Unfiltered, and as you saw on the show, said that's not true. Okay, the Crystal Mason has maintained she did not know she was ineligible to vote. Okay, and they said that there was a poll worker who testified that Crystal Mason read the full affidavit. Crystal Mason denies that. Okay, quote, it is disappointing that the state has chosen to request further review of Ms. Mason's case, but we are confident that justice will ultimately prevail. Tommy Buser, B-U-S-E-R Clancy, Buser Clancy, senior staff attorney at the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas, said in a statement. The Court of Appeals decision was well reasoned and correct. It's time to give Ms. Mason peace with her family. It's time to give Ms. Mason peace with her family. Now, though it had initially upheld her conviction, the Tarrant County-based Second Court of Appeals overturned that conviction in March of 2024 after the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals instructed the lower court to, quote, evaluate the sufficiency, end quote, of the evidence against Crystal Mason. Evaluate the sufficiency, end quote, of the evidence against Crystal Mason. Initially, the court found that Crystal Mason's alleged knowledge that she was on supervised release and therefore ineligible to vote was sufficient for an illegal voting conviction. Her alleged knowledge, okay? But in instructing it to reevaluate the case, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeal ruled the lower court, quote, erred by failing to require proof that Crystal Mason had actual knowledge that it was a crime for her to vote while on supervised release, end quote. The burden of proof is on the prosecution, not on the defense. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeal ruled that the lower court ruling was wrong because the lower court erred by failing to require proof that Crystal Mason had actual knowledge that it was a crime for her to vote while on supervised release. She had served her federal prison sentence. Now, the years-long saga began in 2016 when Crystal Mason, on advice from a poll worker, submitted a provisional ballot during that year's presidential election after she discovered her name was not on the voter roll. Her provisional ballot was rejected because she was not eligible to participate in elections while still on supervised release for a federal tax fraud conviction. She was arrested a few months later. Now, the case against Crystal Mason hinged on an affidavit that she signed before casting her provisional ballot that required individuals to swear that, quote, if a felon, I have completed all my punishment, including any term of incarceration, parole, supervision, period of probation, or I have been pardoned, end quote. A trial court judge convicted her of illegally voting, a second-degree state felony at the time, after a poll worker testified. This was when we talked to attorney Kim T. Cole on Roland Martin Unfiltered. She mentioned this poll worker who testified at Crystal Mason's trial. Okay, A trial court judge convicted Crystal Mason of illegally voting, a second-degree state felony at the time, after a poll worker testified he watched Crystal Mason read and run her finger along each line of an affidavit. Okay, now this was presented as evidence that she understood she was not eligible to vote. Crystal Mason, however, said she did not read the entire affidavit. At trial, a supervisor, now this is another key point right here. At trial, a supervisor from the probation officer overseeing Crystal Mason's release testified that no one from that office had informed Crystal Mason that she was still ineligible to vote. So you have somebody presenting something as evidence that does not reach the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. You have a poll worker testifying that she ran her finger along each line of the affidavit. And then you have a supervisor from the probation office overseeing Crystal Mason's release testifying that no one from that office had informed Crystal Mason that she was still ineligible to vote. Now, in its 2022 ruling instructing the lower appellate court to reevaluate the case, the Court of Criminal Appeals held that Texas election law requires individuals to know that they are ineligible to vote to be convicted of illegal voting. Okay? In its 2020 ruling instruction, the lower appellate court, in its 2022 ruling instructing the lower appellate court to reevaluate the case, the Court of Criminal Appeals held that Texas election law requires individuals to know that they are ineligible to vote to be convicted of illegal voting. Well, the supervisor that is over from the probation office overseeing Crystal Mason's release testified that no one from that office had informed her that she was still ineligible to vote. Now, the law had been clarified by lawmakers in 2021 with additions to the election code stating Texans may not be convicted of voting illegally. Texans may not be convicted of voting illegally solely upon the fact that the person signed a provisional ballot, and instead required other evidence to corroborate they knowingly tried to cast an unlawful vote. Okay, now it's pathetic and sick and sad that you have Texas District Attorney Phil Sorrells, who still wants to persecute Crystal Mason after her conviction was overturned by the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. But all of this deals with understanding law. All of this deals with understanding law and how law governs every aspect of our lives. Now, the question we need to ask ourselves is, if the African American vote does not matter, why are they working so hard to suppress the African American vote? Why are they working so hard to intimidate us? When you look at the state of Florida, the election integrity task force that Governor Ron DeSantis put together to go after people who they claimed were voting illegally. Okay, this is designed to suppress the African American vote. Now, when we look here at there was a piece from the Washington Post Okay. And this article here from the Washington Post deals with how GOP-led efforts, GOP voter fraud crackdown overwhelmingly targets minorities and Democrats. If we look at this article here from the Washington Post, let me pull this up. And this is a piece from 2023. GOP voter fraud crackdown overwhelmingly targets minorities, Democrats. Blacks and Hispanics made up more than 75% of defendants, and Democrats nearly 60%, in a controversial push by Republicans to prosecute election cheating, according to a first of its kind analysis by the Washington Post. Now, this article is from December 20th, 2023. African Americans and Hispanics made up more than 75% of defendants, and Democrats made up nearly 60% of defendants in a controversial push by Republicans to prosecute election cheating. If we look here quickly at this piece, as Donald Trump falsely claimed the 2020 presidential election was stolen from him, Republicans in some states launched special units to prosecute voter fraud as part of a high-profile and controversial push to stamp out cheating some claimed was rampant. But the election integrity units established or expanded in six states after Trump's loss obtained only 47 convictions during a period in which tens of millions of votes were cast, and the units overwhelmingly targeted minorities and Democrats for prosecution, according to a first of its kind analysis by the Washington Post of nearly every prosecution. So okay, let's go through and look at this slowly. Tens of millions of votes were cast. Okay. But in 6 states that launched these voter integrity commissions, there were only 47 convictions for illegally voting. Only 47, not 47 million convictions, not 47,000, 47 convictions out of tens of millions of votes cast. And African Americans and Hispanics were heavily targeted. Now, the analysis found that 76% of defendants whose race or ethnicity could be identified were African American or Hispanic, while white people constituted 24% of those prosecuted by the units. Now, white people are according to the 2020 census, 57% of the U.S. population. But 76% of the defendants were African Americans and Latino. Registered Democrats made up 58% of those targeted whose party could be identified, while registered Republicans were 23% of those targeted. In the rest of the cases, the defendant was not registered with the political party. The Washington Post was able to determine a defendant's race, ethnicity, or political party in roughly 70% of the cases. Okay, read the rest of this piece here. This is all about voter intimidation. This is all about voter intimidation and trying to suppress the African American and Latino vote, because you have some white people, not all white people, but some white people fear that by the year 2043, they are going to be a numerical minority in this country, and they fear what's going to happen to them. Now, all white people don't fear this, but there's some, especially a lot of Republicans, who do. And they fear what's going to happen to them when they become a numerical minority in this country. Some of them feel like they are losing power. Okay. And as we talked about in my deconstruction of Candace Owens' interview on the Breakfast Club, the two shows that we did dedicated to that, what you have is cultural anxiety. When we look at going back to the 2016 presidential election, okay, there there was a piece from the Atlantic, the Atlantic.com, dealing with how it was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Donald Trump. This piece right here from the Atlantic.com from May 9th, 2017. So read this article right here. Let's flip over to this. It was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Trump. A new study finds that fear of societal change, not economic pressure, motivated votes for the president among non-salaried workers without college degrees. Okay, this is the fear, the browning of America. That's what this is, the fear of the browning of America. Okay, so read this piece here from the Atlantic.com. It was cultural anxiety that drove white working class voters to Trump. And there were other stories that came out after the election that dealt with the same topic. Okay, now, you have to understand history to really understand this attack on voting rights and also felony disenfranchisement laws. And your understanding of politics is directly related to your understanding of history. So I'm not just a national political commentator and you watch me every Friday on Roland Martin Unfiltered. I'm also a historian. I've been on Roland Martin Unfiltered basically pretty much every Friday since October 2020. So it's going on 4 years. To get a better understanding of this history, if we look at this piece here from the Brennan Center for Justice, this deals with voting rights restoration in Florida, voting rights restoration in Florida. So going back to 2018, and we talked about this story on the African History Network show. We talked about it on Roland Martin Unfiltered as well. You had Desmond Meade, a former felon Desmond Meade, African American man, who led the charge. One of the main people leading the charge to restore voting rights for ex-offenders. Okay, and they put it on the ballot. He got over 60% of the vote, something like 66% of the vote. Okay. But then the Republican-controlled state legislature there in Florida then passed the bill to put restrictions on people getting their voting rights back. Okay. So you had to pay all your fines and any restitution, things like this. They put all these restrictions to limit the number of ex-offenders who could actually vote, because they know if these people voted, they will vote these Republicans out of office. So this is about maintaining power. And you've heard me say a number of times, politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. Okay, politics impacts every aspect of our lives, from the water we drink to the food we eat to the air we breathe. Voting is only one small part of politics, but voting is an extremely important part of politics, because that determines who's going to hold political office, who will have political power to actually write legislation, get legislation passed, who will have political power to appoint people to the cabinets, appoint a Secretary of Education, attorney generals, whether at the federal level or at the state level. Okay. And at the federal level, it's the U.S. Senate that confirms Supreme Court justices, confirms federal judges, which are lifetime appointments, but also confirms members of the president's cabinet. Okay, whether you talk about Secretary of Energy, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Small Business Administration, Attorney General, etc. That's the U.S. Senate, and the U.S. senators are either elected or appointed by a governor. When you have a senator who dies in office or who resigns and someone else has to finish out that term, they are appointed by the governor. Okay, so you have to understand how all this comes together. I teach a whole concept called political self-defense, and political self-defense deals with understanding how laws and policies impact conditions of African Americans, and understanding of the laws, and understanding how to disarm them of this weapon and use the laws to our advantage, but at least reduce the amount of harm that laws and policies inflict upon us. Okay, this is dealing with understanding political self-defense. All right, now let's look at this here quickly. Okay. Now, this is at the Brennan Center for Justice, voting rights restoration efforts in Florida. This is from last updated August 7th, 2023, originally published May 31st, 2019. Okay. And what I want to focus in on here, when we look at felony disenfranchisement laws, we see them largely developed after the 13th Amendment, after the 15th Amendment is adopted in February of 1870. The 15th Amendment guaranteeing the right to vote for African-American men, not women at this time, but not African-American women, but African-American men at this time. Okay. However, if we go back to 1868, when Florida wrote their state constitution, okay, 1868, when Florida wrote their state constitution, we're going to see that Florida state constitution had a felony disenfranchisement law written into it. And I'm trying to find that part. Hold on, let me see something here. Because in one of these pieces from the Brennan Center for Justice, you can read that one here, but I think this is the one that I want. There's one dealing with yeah, this one right here. This is what I want. This deals with Florida when they wrote their state constitution in 1868. Okay, the name of this, and I'm going to close this out here. This is the one that I want right here. Let's see, let's go to it right here. This is called History of Florida's Felony Disenfranchisement Provision. History of Florida's Felony Disenfranchisement Provision. This is from the Brennan Center for Justice, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. Brennan, B-R-E-N-N-A-N, Brennan Center for Justice, Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And it talks about the constitutional provision disenfranchising people with felony convictions was originally enacted in the aftermath of the Civil War in 1868. So Civil War, we know, ends 1865. 13th Amendment is ratified December 6, 1865, adopted December 18th, 1865. Okay. Aftermath of the Civil War in 1860, aftermath of the Civil War in 1868, as one of several tools to suppress the votes of newly freed slaves. Okay, the constitutional provision disenfranchising or taking away somebody's right to vote if they're convicted of a felony was originally enacted in the aftermath of the Civil War in 1868 as one of several tools to suppress the votes of newly freed slaves. 100 years later, in 1968, the provision was reenacted despite its history of discrimination and its continuing racially disparate effects. Felony disenfranchisement has long been used to diminish the voting power of Florida's African American population, and the law continues to have that effect. Okay. So this is all about targeting African Americans and suppressing our vote, which diminishes our political power. Felony disenfranchisement has long been used to diminish the voting power of Florida's African American population, and the law continues to have that effect. So this is why oftentimes you hear me say that we need to stop telling African Americans to exercise your right to vote. Stop telling African Americans to exercise your right to vote. If you want to exercise, you go to the gym and work out. You don't vote for exercise. You vote for power. You vote for power. You vote for policies that are beneficial for you, your family, your communities, and your people. Okay? Politics is the legal distribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and the writing of laws, statutes, ordinances, amendments, and treaties, their adoption, interpretation, and enforcement. You don't vote for exercise, you vote for power. When we change the purpose of voting, when we change our messaging and explaining to people why you vote, then you will get better results. As long as you think you vote for symbolism, as long as you think that you vote because Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Rosa Parks and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and John Lewis and Hosea Williams fought for you to have the right to vote, okay? And as long as you believe nonsense like it doesn't matter who you vote for, just vote, that's nonsense, because you can be voting for people who are working to dismantle the legacy of Dr. King and Fannie Lou Hamer and Ella Baker and Rosa Parks and John Lewis and Hosea Williams, etc. Okay? So you have to vote with purpose in understanding policies, understanding politics, understanding law, understanding how these policies impact you. Whose policies are most beneficial for African Americans, and what's good for African Americans are good for America in general. Whose policies will do the least amount of harm? Which candidate can create an environment for you to push your agenda the farthest and get the most accomplished? Who will protect gains that have already been made? Who will protect gains that have already been made? And one of the problems is we don't understand how to assess gains and progress already made. So we will operate under an illusion that no progress has been made, therefore nothing's at stake. And as we just saw with affirmative action, as you saw a few months ago, affirmative action in college admissions was overturned by a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court that's operating based upon an ultra-conservative agenda. And that 6-3 Supreme Court was put in place by Donald Trump, who got and he got nominations provided to him from lists that came from the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society, two ultra-conservative right-wing think tanks. They provided him lists of names, and he got 226 federal judges confirmed, which is a lifetime appointment. He got 3 Supreme Court justices confirmed. This was after Attorney General, that was after Merrick Garland was blocked in 2016 by Senator Mitch McConnell, and Republicans took back control of the U.S. Senate in 2014. They blocked 103 federal judge nominations that President Barack Obama made, and they blocked Merrick Garland as Obama's Supreme Court nomination. They did not even give Merrick Garland a hearing. So when Donald Trump becomes president through the Electoral College, and most people don't understand how the Electoral College works, okay? When Donald Trump becomes president through the Electoral College, he gets Neil Gorsuch confirmed, he gets Brett Kavanaugh confirmed, and then after Amy Coney Barrett dies, they push through after Ruth Bader Ginsburg dies, they push through Amy Coney Barrett right before the 2020 presidential election and get a 6-3 conservative Supreme Court locked in, and they are serving for life. These are lifetime appointments. So then when the Dobbs decision comes out dealing with taking away the protections for abortions based upon the 14th Amendment, that gets struck down by the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. Okay. And this has been protected rights for women since 1973. Then you have affirmative action in college admissions struck down by the 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. You had President Joe Biden's executive order when it came to student loan forgiveness, which would have moved 500,000 African-American families from a negative net worth to a positive net worth. This gets struck down by Donald Trump's 6-3 conservative Supreme Court. So because you had people who didn't understand what was at stake in 2016 and did not understand that one of the lasting effects, and probably the most important lasting effect of a president, is the president's Supreme Court justices. George H.W. Bush, the father, George H.W. Bush, nominated Clarence Thomas in 1993. I think it was 1993. Clarence Thomas is still on the bench ruling, especially on cases against African Americans 31 years later. George H.W. Bush is dead. Clarence Thomas is still on the Supreme Court ruling on cases that impact Americans, especially African Americans. So, see, we have to understand political self-defense and understand defense and offense at the same time and fight against us. This is why we have to stop telling African Americans to exercise your right to vote. You vote for power. You vote to acquire power, to put people in place, to pass laws that are beneficial to you. Now, laws are not only going to be beneficial to African Americans because based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Section 601, non-discrimination and fairly assisted programs, it's illegal to have policies only from one race of people. Race-based policies are illegal. You can have policies that are for minorities. You can do that, but policies only for African Americans, only for one race of people, that's illegal. Okay, and I talked about this when I do my presentations dealing with reparations, when I spoke to the Detroit Reparations Task Force March 2nd, 2024, when I did my presentation, and you can watch that lecture that I did on our social media platforms, my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, our Facebook fan page, The African History Network. Also, I'll put it on our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We'll get it up there as well. But if you go to archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, and I'm going to pull up a slide from the presentation here because I show this to people because unfortunately, many of our people don't understand law, don't understand history. But most Americans don't understand law and history either. I show this to people so we can deal with facts and evidence, okay, because proper documentation ends all conversation. Section 601 of the, let's go to this slide here, of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And if you just Google, why are race-based policies illegal at the federal level? usually the first hit that comes up is this right here. Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, Non-Discrimination and Fairly Assisted Program, Section 601. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So you can write policies. Now, this is at archives.gov. Archives.gov is the U.S. National Archives, the U.S. National Archives. You can also read the Presidential Records Act of 1978 at the U.S. National Archives website also, because it doesn't say a president can keep classified documents once they leave office. That's not what the Presidential Records Act says, but you can read it for yourself. So you can have policies for minority groups, things like that. And I hear people operating based upon this misinformation out here by Black social media disinformation agents, podcast pimps, and social media whores out here just lying to our people, not providing any evidence. But I hear people saying that, I don't want minority programs. I don't want minority set-aside programs, things like this. We want policies only for African Americans. That's not going to happen. That's illegal. You're not going to have policies only from one race in the first place. But as somebody who managed an African American owned company that had government contracts with the city of Detroit, county of Wayne, and state of Michigan, and who was also a minority owned business and had minority business status, because in various municipalities, in various states, in various counties, you get minority certification, and it gives you an advantage in bidding on contracts. Okay, you get extra points in the point system when they determine who to get a contract to if you are a minority owned business. All right. So the question that I would ask people, having that experience, having managed won numerous government contracts, having managed a business that had the majority of our employees were African Americans, the question I would ask people is, why wouldn't we focus on being the minority that's getting the majority of the benefits? Why would we not focus on being the minority getting the majority of the set-aside contracts, things like this, after having actually done it? Now, if you just listen to somebody on YouTube that doesn't have any experience, or somebody on social media has no experience in doing this, and they're just spouting talking points, okay, they're just trying to get more clicks and likes on social media posts, then they'll say some stupid stuff like that. They'll say something, oh, we only want race-specific policies. These are people who never read the 1964 Civil Rights Act, never been involved in writing public policy for a major city. I've been involved in writing public policy for the city of Detroit, okay, which is how I learned about this federal law, because our corporate counsel, I was on a committee to write an executive order for the city of Detroit. Our corporate counsel, at our first meeting, Sharon McPhail told us it's illegal to write policies that are only for African Americans, but we can write policies for Detroit-based residences. And the majority, the population of Detroit was 85% Black at that time. Okay, so you have to understand how to navigate throughout the system. Read this here. So this is at archives.gov, U.S. National Archives, Civil Rights Act 1964. Okay, archives.gov, and it goes through and it gives some of the history of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It has the actual text here that you can read it. But if you just search for 601, okay, we're going to go right here. We want Title VI. Title VI, Non-Discrimination and Fairly Assisted Programs. This is it right here. Now, most of these people you watch on social media don't understand law, and they're not going to tell you this. And they've never been involved in writing public policy or anything like this. I've done all that. That's how I know this. So I'm not talking about something that I saw in a documentary, even though I'm in 7 documentaries. I'm not talking about something that I read in the book, even though I read numerous books. I'm talking about from actual experience, actually doing it. Okay, so read that. Now, let's go back to this from the Brennan Center for Justice. This deals with felony disenfranchisement law, and this deals with the state of Florida. But we see similar things in other states when they start rewriting their state constitutions after slavery ends, but especially after Reconstruction ends in 1877. Okay. Criminal disenfranchisement in Reconstruction, Florida. In 1868, Florida dramatically expanded criminal disenfranchisement. 1868, 3 years after chattel slavery ends, 3 years after the 13th Amendment. For the first time in 1868, the state of Florida barred from the polls, from the voting polls, all people with felony convictions. Okay, all people with felony convictions. So before slavery, like white people with felony convictions, it was all right to vote. After slavery ends, now these black people want to vote. Oh, no. We can't. We have to prevent a Negro legislature. Well, we have to prevent this. What was the fear? The fear was African Americans gaining political power and being able to vote, hold office in state legislatures, being able to write policies that white people had to abide by, write laws that white people had to abide by, and vote on those laws. This was at a time when the African American population in Florida was 48%. Okay, in 1868, African Americans were 48% of the population of the state of Florida. And they said that white people said they were doing this to prevent a Negro legislature, to prevent a Negro legislature. So they put this felony disenfranchisement law in place in 1868, and you lost your right to vote for life. You lost your right to vote for life. But not only that, what they did was they expanded the number of laws that were classified as felonies. Okay, so let's look at this. For the first time in 1868, the state of Florida barred from the polls all people with felony convictions, while at the same time creating a host of new felony crimes. The list of disqualifying infamous crimes was expanded as well. African Americans were disproportionately disenfranchised under the new provision because state policies at the time were designed to control newly freed slaves. State policies at the time were designed to control newly freed slaves through the criminal justice system. In 1865, the Florida state legislature enacted black codes as a way to control freedmen, former slaves, freedmen. A crucial component of the codes was an expansion of the criminal justice system to deal with minor offenses, that legislators believed blacks were more likely to commit and that had been formerly punished by their masters. Okay, crimes that they believed blacks were more likely to commit and crimes that had been formerly punished by their masters. The black codes had their desired effect. By the 1870s to 1880s, estimates show that more than 95% of the convicts in the Florida convict camps were African American. More than 95% of the convicts in the Florida convict camp were African American at a time when we're 48% of the population in the state of Florida. A captain in one of the camps at the time noted it was possible to send a Negro to prison on almost any pretext but difficult to get a white man there. Okay. And then they talk about how we were 48% of the population, and how this was done to prevent a Negro legislature. Okay, so read the rest of this here. This is about the fear of African Americans gaining political power, utilizing political power. History of Florida's felony disenfranchisement provision. This is at BrennanCenter.org. BrennanCenter.org. All right. Now, if you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network a few ways. Be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understand the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We do thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. This is a 10-week class. We're doing more than 10 weeks this time around. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, Saturday, May 11th, Saturday, May 18th, and Saturday, May 25th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Click right here to register here for the class. The class is on sale $60, regularly $130. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it any time. So a year from now, 2 years from now, you can still watch the entire course. We have the lesson plan here for the entire course also already laid out, so you can look at the content that we cover. We deal with 80 to 100 articles, and I put together this class. I've been teaching this class on and off since 2017. Okay, I've been studying history 34 years now. Do lectures across the country. Been hosting the African History Network show 14 years. But we look at, there's over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles that we'll go through and look at. The 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I'll show you excerpts of the books on the screen usually. And we look at video clips of interviews I've done with historians like Professor James Small, Professor Kabahai Wafaa-Kamene, Anthony Browder, who wrote Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization, which is one of the books we use in the class, Runoko Rashidi, who wrote Black Star, The African Presence in Early Europe, which is another book that we use in the class, okay? So you can register for this. Its content is PG-13. You can use this information with your children as well. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Okay, and we'll post the link here. The link's in the thread of this broadcast. And you can support us through PayPal and Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, $ the AHN show through Cash App, and through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. So we have the information right here on the website as well. This is our official Cash App account, $ the AHN show, SHOW. When you go to it, it'll say Michael and show my picture there. These are fake African History Network Cash App accounts here that have been stealing money from us. There are a few other ones out there I've identified. I'm still trying to get them shut down. You can click right here on our link and it shows our QR code, okay, for Cash App. This helps us stay on the air, keep doing the research, pay some of the bills, etc. Upgrade equipment, take care of what needs to be done. All right. Okay, let's go back to this story here. Now, quickly dealing with felony disenfranchisement. Okay, then we're going to move to the next story. A lot of people don't know. So when we look at the history of felony disenfranchisement, right, and especially in these former Confederate states, there's a good article that we use in the second class that I teach, dealing with Black resistance movements, Haitian Revolution, U.S. Civil War, Civil Rights Movement, the Black Power Movement, 1800 to 1968. That's the second class that I created and that I teach. This is a good article here from History.com. History.com is the official website of the History Channel. This deals with how Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. How Jim Crow era laws suppressed the African American vote for generations. And one of the things they talk about in here is the all-white primary. So they talk about the Mississippi State Convention of 1890. They helped kicked off a lot of this. Now, the poll tax law in 1889, Florida instituted their poll tax law, which was a tax that you had to pay to register to vote. That was the year before the Mississippi State Convention. But after Mississippi has their state convention, rewrites their state constitution, impose poll taxes and literacy tests, things of this nature, obstacles to the 15th Amendment, we're going to see other states do the same thing. Georgia, Alabama, 1901, Georgia, I think it was 1910, South Carolina, 1895, Louisiana, 1898. Okay. But so you have literacy tests that are put in place. Okay. This is one of the ways that they try to suppress the African-American vote. Poll taxes, but also all white primaries. Now, this is something that the state of Texas did, where Crystal Mason is being persecuted right now. All white primaries were instituted by Democrats at the time. Now, this is before the party realignment was completed in 1968 with the election of Richard Nixon. And you had a shifting in the parties, which began with the party realignment begins in 1928, which is what is known as the Lily White Movement of 1928. The Lily White Movement of 1928. Okay. And this was the effort to push African Americans out of the Republican Party. And we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party. Okay. There was a article that I did a 3-hour lecture dealing with the history of why African Americans switched from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. There was a piece from one of these Chicago publications, and it dealt with the beginning of the Lily White movement. This was an effort to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and get Herbert Hoover elected as president. So Republicans appealed to Southern segregationist Democrats in 5 former Confederate states to get them to vote for Herbert Hoover. Okay. And they started ignoring the needs and concerns of African Americans and started pushing us out of the Republican Party, started ignoring the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s, largely as a result of the movie The Birth of a Nation. And we started slowly going over to the Democratic Party. So by the time the 1960 presidential election takes place between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, 60% of African Americans had already switched over to the Democratic Party. And one of the things that caused the switch was we found, even though we were leery of President Roosevelt, we found him to be largely more receptive to our issues. But also in 1948, President Harry Truman, when President Harry Truman ran for president in 1948, the Democrats had a pro-civil rights agenda, And what this did was this caused Southern segregationists to separate, some Southern segregationists to separate and form the Dixiecrat Party. And Strom Thurmond ran for president in 1948 as a Dixiecrat. Okay. If we look here, and the Dixiecrats were anti-civil rights. If we look here, this is the piece I was looking for. This is from ChicagoMag.com. ChicagoMag.com. And this is called How the Party of Lincoln Lost Virtually the Entire Black Vote in 88 Years. How the Party of Lincoln lost virtually the entire black vote in 88 years. In 1928, the Chicago Defender, a black-owned newspaper, warned the GOP that it was in danger of alienating African Americans. They did not listen, and the fall came fast. Now, this is from July 29th, 2016. The point I want to go to here is when they talk about the Lily White movement, okay? And this was a Southern strategy that was implemented by the Republican Party. Here's an excerpt of what Robert Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, wrote. Let's see here. So what the Defender did, okay, finally in October 20th, 1928 editorial entitled What We Want, the Chicago Defender made a dramatic announcement. We want justice in America, and we mean to get it. If 50 years of support to the Republican Party doesn't get us justice, then we must of necessity shift our allegiance to new quarters, end quote. It was the first time the Chicago Defender had failed to endorse the Republican presidential candidate since 1912. In the run-up to the 1912 election, Woodrow Wilson, despite a typical history as a Southern Democrat, had reached out to black voters, even though he was a white supremacist, including leaders like Dr. W.B. Du Bois. After Woodrow Wilson's victory, the Chicago Defender reported that a substantial number of blacks supported him. Once in office, President Woodrow Wilson immediately alienated his black supporters. Okay. Now, Robert Abbott, founder of the Chicago Defender, is a diehard Republican his whole life. But with Herbert Hoover, who is explicitly, I wouldn't describe him as a racist, but he's interested in what he called a lily white Republican Party, This is after generations in which the Republican Party has stood for racial justice. So this was the lily white movement that begins in 1928. Okay. So scrolling down later in the article, it says the Republican National Convention was held in Chicago that summer, which to those at the Chicago Defender made the near absence of African Americans all the more galling. So now they're talking about, let's see, the Defender, what period of time? Right, it must be talking about right about 1928 here. Okay, the Republican National Convention was held in Chicago that summer, which to those at the Defender made the near absence of African Americans all the more galling. So consistently had President Herbert Hoover pursued his policy of making the party lily white, that the newspaper had to fight even to get African American delegates seated. Okay, so read the rest of this, but and research the lily white movement of 1928. The lily white movement of 1928. And this was the effort by Republicans to push African Americans out of the Republican Party and to ignore our needs and concerns, etc. All right, now going back to this piece here from history.com, the official website of the History Channel, how Jim Crow era law suppressed the African American vote for generations. Okay, in this piece, they talk about the all-white primaries that took place in Texas, and this led to the lawsuit of Smith versus Allwright in 1944, which was won by Thurgood Marshall. All-white primaries. When literacy tests, poll taxes, grandfather clauses, and the many other ways to circumvent the 15th Amendment did not work to suppress black voter turnout, white legislators in several southern states used all white primaries to all but eliminate black voters' presence in the electoral process. In Texas, for example, the Texas state legislature gave the Democratic Party the authority to set its own rules. The party determined that it was for white voters only. It was for white voters only, excluding African Americans from its elections and effectively making local electoral politics dominated by one party that upheld Jim Crow laws. After a white election official blocked an African American man named Lonnie E. Smith the right to vote in the 1940 Texas Democratic primary, the NAACP's Thurgood Marshall and William H. Hastie, Hastie, challenged the case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case Smith versus Allwright that the Texas white primary system was unconstitutional. Quote, the right to vote in a primary for the nomination
to be famous.
The right to vote for a primary.
I've got to make something good.
The right to vote in a primary for the, let me pull this back up. Hold on. They had a video playing. I don't want that playing in this broadcast here. Let's go back down to this here. Let me go back to this. Okay, it said the right to vote in a primary for the nomination of candidates without discrimination by the state is a right secured by the Constitution, said the U.S. Supreme Court in an 8-1 U.S. Supreme Court decision. Okay, and that was Smith versus Allwright. Right here. Okay, so read the rest of that. The name of this article is How Jim Crow Era Laws Suppressed the African American Vote for Generations. Okay, and that's at history.com, which is the official website of the History Channel. Okay, now okay, so check out those pieces. Now, there was back in March when we talked about Crystal Mason's conviction being overturned. We talked to, on Roland Martin Unfiltered, we talked to her attorney then, and we mentioned a case of a white GOP official. And I want to look at this article here. NBC News had an article on this, and this is to show a contrast between the way Crystal Mason is being treated and how white people are being treated when they're convicted, in the rare cases when they're convicted of voter fraud. Let me pull this up. Okay, Georgia Republican Party official voted illegally 9 times. So this article right here from NBCnews.com. Georgia Republican Party official voted illegally 9 times, judge rules. Brian Pritchard, Pritchard, first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, was fined $5,000 for voting illegally and registering to vote while serving a sentence for a felony, a judge ruled. Now, he wasn't sentenced to prison time. Crystal Mason filed a provisional ballot that was not counted, and she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Okay, now here's Brian Pritchard. Okay. Republican official in Georgia, first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party, another former Confederate state, Georgia, that has the largest Confederate monument out of anywhere in the country, called Stone Mountain. And on the side of Stone Mountain, they have carved into it. And I've been to Stone Mountain. I've been on top of Stone Mountain. I've walked up the side of Stone Mountain. They have the carvings of General Robert E. Lee, Jefferson Davis, and Thomas Stonewall Jackson, 3 Confederate traitors that they call hero, all slave owners. A judge ruled this week that a top Georgia, now this article is from March 28th, 2024. Now this article came out the same day that I think it was the same day, I think it was the same day of her conviction being overturned. Yeah, Crystal Mason's conviction was overturned Thursday, March 28th, 2024. The same day this article came out. A judge ruled this week that a top Georgia Republican Party official who has promoted former President Donald Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud affecting the outcome of the 2020 presidential election, this genius has repeatedly voted illegally, a judge ruled that week. Okay, so here you have Brian Pritchard, a top Georgia Republican Party official who's pushing the big lie, and white people in Georgia are pissed off that African Americans voted and got Biden and Harris elected, but also Senator Raphael Warnock and Senator John Ossoff as well. This guy was pushing the big lie, and a judge found him guilty of repeatedly voting illegally. He found that he voted illegally 9 times. Brian Pritchard, the first vice chairman of the Georgia Republican Party and a conservative talk show host, was fined $5,000 for voting illegally and registering to vote while serving a sentence for a felony conviction. Brian Pritchard was also ordered not to commit further violations, to face public reprimand for his conduct, and to pay the state election board's investigative costs. In a 25-page ruling Wednesday, administrative law judge Lisa Boggs, B-O-G-G-S, affirmed the board's finding that Brian Pritchard had voted, check this out, had voted illegally 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He voted illegally 9 times in defiance of his extended probation in connection with a pair of felony convictions dating back nearly 30 years. So he had to pay a $5,000 fine for voting illegally 9 times. In Texas, they sentenced Crystal Mason to 5 years in prison for voting once, and her provisional ballot was not counted. And now, Texas District Attorney Phil Sorrells of Tarrant County wants her conviction reinstated. You can't make this stuff up. White man votes illegally 9 times, gets fined $5,000. Black woman votes illegally. They say illegally once. She was not told that she could not vote once, and her vote doesn't count. She gets sentenced to 5 years in prison. You can't make this stuff up. Brian Pritchard was initially sentenced in 1996 to 3 years probation in connection with felony forgery charges in Pennsylvania, according to the ruling. Okay, read the rest of this article here. this is Brian again, great upstanding citizen. You know, he values voting so much he voted illegally 9 times. A judge ruled. That's not me saying it. All right, now, lastly, last article on this subject. Some people may ask the question. Well, let me. We talked about some of the history of felony disenfranchisement laws and targeting African Americans, right? After slavery ends, to suppress the African American vote, to suppress our political power. Okay. Did you know that well, let me phrase the question like this. Back in, I think it was 2020, when Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, he was thinking about running again for president, right? And one of the things he was saying was that if you are a convicted felon, you should be able to vote from prison. Okay. And you had a lot of people who were laughing at him, saying he was crazy, didn't know what he was talking about. Okay. Now, sometimes he doesn't know sometimes he does sound crazy, but it's not because of that. Okay. He was right on that accord. He was right in that instance. All right. I had some disagreements with him. Sometimes he just, it's like, but he was right in this case, right? The reason why Bernie Sanders said that you should be able to vote from prison if you are a convicted felon is because in the state of Vermont, where he is a U.S. senator, you can vote from prison if you are a convicted felon. Also, you can do the same thing in the state of Maine. Now, why is it in Vermont and Maine right now you can be a convicted felon and vote from prison, but in Florida and Georgia and Mississippi and a lot of those former Confederate states, you could not? Is because Maine and Vermont did not have a history of having large populations of African Americans, as well as having large populations of slaves. Their history, even though they did have slavery in at least in Maine, their history is different than those former Confederate states that took up arms against the Union and formed the Confederacy to maintain slavery. Their history is different. Let's look at this article from NBCnews.com. Most states disenfranchise felons. Maine and Vermont allow inmates to vote from prison. Advocates say the rehabilitative effects of letting inmates have a voice is profound. Now, this article is from February 26, 2018 by Jane C. Timm, Timm, for NBC News. Okay. And in the article here, it says, okay, so they talk about this gentleman, Joseph Jackson, was one of the millions of Americans inspired by Barack Obama's 2008 White House bid. Let's see here. Okay, Jackson, okay, he's 52 years old. He was convicted in Maine, one of just 2 states that allow felons to vote from behind bars. In the U.S., nearly all convicted felons are disenfranchised during their prison sentences and often barred from the ballot for years after release. Okay, now, in 2018, when Florida put on the ballot restoring voting rights to felons, at that time, only 4 states banned felons from voting for life. Florida was one of them. And that law in Florida dated back to 1868, when Florida wrote their state constitution. So all these black conservatives out here who want to talk about how slavery is behind us, slavery is in the past, slavery has nothing to do with today, They don't want to talk about laws that are in existence today that are the legacy of slavery, the vestiges of slavery, and were put in place like that 1868 felony disenfranchisement law 3 years after the Civil War ended. And it was put in place to suppress the political power of African Americans, of former slaves. Sometimes offenders lose the right to vote for life. But as the impact of felony disenfranchisement laws grows along with skyrocketing incarceration rates, others are rethinking the rules that kept 6.1 million Americans from voting in 2016. Now, under the U.S. prison population dropped each year of the Obama administration, and each year in the Biden-Harris administration, I think it's fallen some also. I don't have the exact numbers, but I know in the Obama administration, the U.S. prison population dropped each year, and the war on drugs was declining, was winding down under the Obama administration as well. But as the impact of felony disenfranchisement, Alabama, Maryland, and Wyoming all recently eased voting restrictions for released felons, while Florida organizers have put a constitutional amendment on November's ballot to give most offenders their voting rights back after completing their sentences, including for any on probation or parole. So that's 2018. So they're talking about November 2018. Meanwhile, Maine and Vermont remain unique in preserving voting rights for prisoners, and serve as a model for states like New Jersey, where Democrats, newly in control of all three branches of government, plan to propose a bill to stop the disenfranchisement of felons and allow them to vote from behind bars. Advocates say the rehabilitative effects of letting incarcerated felons have a voice in their communities are profound, while critics argue they should not be permitted to take part in any process that could end up affecting the very laws they've broken. Well, when people get out of prison and get a job, they don't have problems. They don't have a problem with taking their taxes. They don't have a problem with taking their taxes. So why shouldn't they be able to vote? Okay, read the rest of this piece here. This is at NBCnews.com. Most states disenfranchise felons. Maine and Vermont allow inmates to vote from prison. All right, I want to move on to the next topic here. So we talked about when I was, let me switch over to this just a second. All right, let's pull up this article here. Give us a thumbs up, give us a heart, give us a like on this broadcast. How's everybody doing? Welcome to the African History Network show. It's Sunday, April 28th, 2024. Let's see here. Okay, so I want to go to these other articles. Okay, just give me a second here. We're switching topics. All right. Also, be sure to register for the online history classes that I teach on Saturdays. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Our next class is Saturday, May 4th, 2024, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have the link here in the thread of the broadcast also. and I'm going to post it here as well. Okay, we'll come back to that. All right, now, when I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, we discussed this story and the news out of the White House that Vice President Kamala Harris is going to do a economic empowerment tour. Hold on, where is that article? Just a second. Okay, right here. Let's close this ad out. Okay, so when I was on Roland Martin Unfiltered on Friday, April 26th, we discussed this story, this news from the White House that starting April 29th, Monday, April 29th, Vice President Kamala Harris was going on what is called a economic opportunity tour. An economic opportunity tour visiting various cities. Is going to start in Atlanta. Then the following week is going to Detroit and is going to other cities. Economic opportunity tour, and it is going to highlight in investing in communities, highlight the work that the Biden-Harris administration has done around economics, building wealth, and ensuring African Americans have the freedom to thrive. There's a article from 11alive.com out of Atlanta called Vice President Kamala Harris to visit Atlanta to tout Biden administration's economic wins. This is from April 25th, 2024. And I didn't even know we were going to talk about this topic. This was the first story we talked about on the show on Friday, and the show started late. So there were some things I wanted to mention that I did not get a chance to mention because we were on a tight time schedule. But Vice President Kamala Harris to visit Atlanta to tout Biden administration's economic wins. Okay, so on Thursday afternoon, the White House announced that Vice President Kamala Harris will be kicking off a nationwide tour called the Economic Opportunity Tour. Is going to start in Atlanta to highlight the work the Biden-Harris administration is doing for the economy. The vice president's first stop on the tour will be at a yet to be announced location in Atlanta on Monday, April 29th. Well, they probably have a location now, hopefully. But at the time of this article, it was yet to be determined. The series of events, according to the White House, will be focused on investing in communities, building wealth, and ensuring every American has freedom to thrive. President Biden and I, Vice President Kamala Harris said, President Biden and I are committed to creating an economy in which every person has the freedom to thrive. The vice president said in the statement announcing the tour, our economic approach has delivered great progress, and we will continue to invest in you, your family, and your future. During the tour, and part of this tour is going to be focused on community, talking to African American men, African Americans in general, but specifically African American men. And this is something we talked about on Roland Martin Unfiltered, to highlight the economic successes, but also to connect people to economic opportunity and the resources that are available. During the tour, according to the White House, the vice president will list some of the administration's wins, including infrastructure investments, cutting the price of insulin drugs, and efforts to forgive student loan debt for some Americans. We know $153 billion has been forgiven for about 4.4 million people, and that's before the latest announcement that Biden made that is going to affect about 40 million people. Vice President Harris will also outline additional steps she and President Biden are taking to expand on their work. According to the White House, VP Harris has made more than 35 trips to 16 states since the beginning of 2024. Okay, she was last in Atlanta in early January 2024 to focus on protecting voting rights in the state. Okay, so read this piece here from this is from 11alive.com. This is from 11alive.com. Vice President Kamala Harris to visit Atlanta to tout Biden administration's economic wins. Now, there's a good piece at good announcement at whitehouse.gov on this, and I want to look at that because it gives more information, and it talks about their success. And one of the things I said on the show is that this gives them an opportunity to go around the country and to claim to take responsibility for these policies that they've been able to put in place that a lot of people don't know exist, and policies that have been beneficial and have helped the economy, help with economics, but also help African Americans as well. Now, if we look here at two things. Number one, you've heard me talk a number of times about this 36-page document that's at whitehouse.gov. Everybody needs to read this, and the black social media disinformation agents are not going to tell you about this. They're not going to go through this on their show. We've been through this numerous times here. Now, this was last updated. This one here is last updated February 27, 2023. This is the 36-page one. This is a fact sheet that shows how the policies of the Biden-Harris administration are helping the African-American community. It's called Fact Sheet. The Biden-Harris administration advances equity and opportunity for Black Americans and communities across the country. It goes through and takes you through policy by policy, where they talk about the American Rescue Plan, the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan that saved the economy, where they talk about 15 million jobs created, 2.6 million of those jobs went to African Americans, where they talk about 39 straight months of private sector job growth. We know the March 2024 numbers, 303,000 jobs created, 3.8% unemployment rate. But they go through category by category, creating opportunities and good paying jobs, et cetera, and show you how these policies are helping African Americans, where they talk about the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill, making critical investments in Black families and communities in the American Rescue Plan that no Republicans in the House or the Senate voted for, historic expansion of the child tax credit, cutting child poverty to record lows for Black children. It lifted 1 million African American children out of poverty. Now we know that child tax credit, the way that they did it in the American Rescue Plan, we know that that was only good for 1 year and expired, but you can get it back if you take back control of the House of Representatives and go from 51 Democrats in the Senate. If you go to like 55, then you can change the filibuster or get rid of the filibuster altogether. Okay, so you can get it back. That made a tremendous difference. Supporting child care providers and reducing child care costs for Black families. The American Rescue Plan provided $39 billion lifeline to help child care providers stay open and compensate early childhood educators as they provide safety and healthy environments for children and help parents. So read the rest of that. So they go through category by category. The American Rescue Plan tripled the earned income tax credit for 17 million workers without dependent children. Okay. They talk about things like $7 billion invested in HBCUs, $7 billion allocated for HBCUs, $5.8 billion in 2021. There's been a record amount of funding for HBCUs under the Biden-Harris administration, ensuring Black homeowners get full value for their homes, et cetera. Okay, so go through and read this. This is a 36-page document at whitehouse.gov. It takes you through policy by policy and shows you how the policies of the Biden-Harris administration are helping African Americans. Now, overwhelmingly, Republicans are against these policies or voted against them overwhelmingly. And even when you look at the $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill that 19 Republicans in the House and 19 Republicans in the Senate and 14 Republicans in the House voted for, That's 34 Republicans, but that's out of approximately 240, 250 Republicans that were in office in the House and the Senate, combination of the House and the Senate. 50 were in the Senate. Okay, out of about 250 Republicans, only 34 voted for the infrastructure bill, even though many Republicans want to take credit for infrastructure dollars coming to their districts or coming to their states, even though they overwhelmingly voted against the bill. Imagine that. All right, now the announcement at whitehouse.gov is this one right here. Let's go to this. Vice President Kamala Harris launches nationwide economic tour. Okay, this is from this is a press release, April 25th, 2024. Okay, the vice president will kick off her multi-state tour with a moderated conversation in Atlanta, Georgia, on April 29th, and an event in Detroit, Michigan during the following week. Okay, so it talks about economic opportunity tour, and then it goes and let's see. Okay, it has a statement from Vice President Kamala Harris that I already read. Let's go to I want to go to the next. Okay, right here. During the vice president's economic opportunity tour, she will highlight how the Biden-Harris administration has delivered historic investments that have supported communities and helped people thrive. This includes making unprecedented investments in small businesses and achieving the fastest creation of Black-owned small businesses in more than 30 years, creating a record number of jobs. So it's over 15 million jobs now, 800,000 manufacturing jobs, 2.6 million of the 15 million have gone to African Americans, which is about 17%. Okay, increasing access to capital for underserved communities, investing in infrastructure, cutting the price of insulin, and expanding access to healthcare. So you have about 41 million people now who have Obamacare, a record number. Okay, a huge success, and many African Americans now have health care who didn't historically have it, didn't have it before the Affordable Health Care Act. Forgiving more student loan debt, erasing medical debt, forgiving more student loan debt than any administration in history, and boosting investments in education, making housing more affordable, lowering child care costs, and increasing the wealth of African American families. So we've seen median household net worth for African Americans increase by 60% under the Biden-Harris administration. Vice President Harris will also outline additional steps that she and President Biden are taking to expand this work. She will be joined on the tour by administration officials, members of Congress, local leaders, and other special guests. Now, what they have accomplished, compare that to what Republicans are talking about, how Republicans have voted and the policies Republicans support, because overwhelmingly Republicans voted against these policies, okay, or are against these policies. Now, the vice president's tour is a continuation of her nonstop travel to communities across the country. And let's see here. Let's go right here. She has made more than 35 trips to 16 states since the beginning of 2024. This includes, and I encourage people to follow Vice President Kamala Harris on Instagram as well as Joe Biden. Go to, if you just follow, because you got all these dumbasses out here who say things like she's not doing anything, she doesn't say anything. That's a blatant lie. Okay. If you just go to Instagram and follow VP on Instagram, if all you did was look at pictures and watch video clips, you would get an education on what's taking place. Okay. She has not been silent. What happens is a lot of the white media does not cover Vice President Kamala Harris. Okay. That's what's happening. A lot of the white media does not cover Vice President Kamala Harris. TheGrio.com does better coverage. April Ryan forthegrio.com does better coverage than a lot of mainstream media does in covering Vice President Kamala Harris. She has made more than 35 trips to 16 states since the beginning of 2024. This includes consistent travel to meet with small business owners and entrepreneurs in underserved communities to discuss challenges and opportunities they face. In March, she traveled to Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina, because there was a Black Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina also. The one in Tulsa was not the only one. To announce $32 million in funds to support historically underserved entrepreneurs. She began the year in Las Vegas, Nevada, where she announced a Small Business Administration rule, an SBA rule that will ensure millions of Americans, now pay attention to this, that will ensure millions of Americans who have served time, who have prison records, who have felonies, are eligible for Small Business Administration loan programs that help individuals start and run small businesses. Okay, who has heard about this? The vice president has long been focused on ensuring that minority, rural, and low-income communities have the capital and resources they need to thrive and support small businesses. Last year, she announced that the Treasury's Community Development Financial Institutions, the CDFIs, the CDFI Fund has awarded over $1.73 billion in grants to 603 community development financial institutions, CDFIs, across the country. Let's see here. Let's go down. Let's skip down here. You can read the rest of this here. Okay, read the rest of that. That's at whitehouse.gov. April 25th, 2024. Vice President Kamala Harris launches nationwide economic opportunity tour. So it's coming to Detroit. I need to see where it is in Detroit because I want to go to that. I want to go to that one. There is this good piece here. I think we talked about this before briefly. This is from December 20th, 2023. This is at whitehouse.gov. Now, that's the official website of the White House. So all the press releases, transcripts of speeches that President Biden gives, updates on what's going on with the administration, policies coming from the administration, what Vice President Kamala Harris is doing. That's all at whitehouse.gov. And you can go to the White House's YouTube channel, which is White House on YouTube, and watch their speeches, things of this nature. Because a lot of that, especially a lot of what Vice President Kamala Harris is doing, white controlled media and cable news largely is not covering. Joanne Reed may talk about it. Reverend Al Sharpton may talk about it. But a lot of that stuff is not covered in cable news. Okay, this one right here, you could take a look at. This covers a lot of the economic success when it comes to small businesses. This is, let me pull this up. President Biden this is from December 2023. President Biden to highlight how his investing in America agenda has led to a Black small business boom. Okay, check this out here. This is at whitehouse.gov also. Let's go over to this. From December 20th, 2023, fact sheet, President Biden to highlight how his investing in America agenda has led to a Black small business boom. And in here, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it talked about Biden visiting the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce. Okay. Says today, President Biden will visit the Wisconsin Black Chamber of Commerce to highlight how Bidenomics is helping drive a Black small business boom and announce new investments in Milwaukee and communities across the country. Under President Biden's leadership, the United States is on track to have the strongest, on track to have the 3 strongest years in history for new small business applications, and with Black business ownership growing at the fastest pace in 30 years. With Black business ownership growing at the fastest pace in 30 years. Okay, now if we skip down here, it talks about while President Biden highlights historic investments from his administration to support small businesses, including Black-owned businesses, extreme Republicans in Congress have repeatedly tried to dismantle the president's small business agenda. Every single Republican opposed the $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which helped small businesses stay afloat during the pandemic and spurred a record small business boom. Okay, many Republicans in Congress, including Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, who spreads a bunch of conspiracy theories, opposed the bipartisan infrastructure law. They also want to repeal key provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act that are lowering healthcare costs, lowering prescription drug costs, and lowering energy costs. President Biden will continue fighting for opportunity for working families and small business owners, while Republicans in Congress want to return to failed trickle-down economics that for too long left too many communities behind. Okay, now it goes on to say, let's look at this. Investing in Black entrepreneurship and opportunity. Okay, so they talk about the Hero Plumbing company in, I think that was the one in Wisconsin. It's a Black-owned small business in there's a Black-owned small business in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that is removing lead pipes in Milwaukee. Okay, now since taking office, Americans have filed a record 15 million applications to start new businesses. Black business ownership is growing at the fastest pace in 30 years, and the share of Black households owning a business has doubled between 2019 and 2022 after falling between 2007 and 2019. When Black businesses do well, they create jobs, generate wealth in their local communities, and make the broader economy stronger. As a result, Black wealth is up a record 60% from before the pandemic, and Black unemployment has reached historic lows. So we know in 2023, the unemployment rate for African Americans reached the lowest it's been since 1972. And 1972 is when they started keeping track of the unemployment rate by race. The administration's investment in Black entrepreneurs is producing results, including nearly $70 billion, a new record in fiscal year 2022 on federal contracts awarded to small disadvantaged businesses, $12 billion in community lenders to expand access to capital and resources to too often sidelined entrepreneurs. The U.S. Department of Treasury estimates that these investments in community lenders will result in a $50 billion increase in lending to Latino communities and a nearly $80 billion increase in lending to Black communities over the next decade. $10 billion in states, tribes, and territories to launch and expand capital access programs for roughly 100,000 small businesses, including $79 million in Wisconsin. Then they talk about new investments in small business growth and local communities across the country. Okay, so you can read that as well. And then I want to go to the next segment here. Today's announcements. This is from, once again, this update is from December 20th, 2023. Today's announcements build on historic progress and investments in Black-owned businesses. So it outlines the American Rescue Plan is supporting small business, including Black-owned small businesses in Wisconsin and around the country through a $10 billion investment, including $79 million in Wisconsin to help small businesses access the capital that they need. Then they talk about, let's see here, the largest ever dedicated federal investment to connect minority small businesses to support. Hold on, did I skip something here? Okay, we got that. Yeah, the Small Business Administration, the Small Business Community Navigators pilot program provided $100 million in funding to 51 organizations, including the U.S. Black Chambers of Commerce and the National Urban League, that worked with local groups to connect entrepreneurs to resources to help their small businesses recover and thrive. A recent Small Business Administration analysis shows that community navigators provided training and counseling to more than 350,000 small businesses, and roughly 43% of the businesses served were Black-owned businesses. Roughly 43% of the businesses served were Black-owned businesses. The largest ever direct federal investment in small business incubators and accelerators. Okay, read that as well. They talk about delivering $150 million in support for small businesses in Wisconsin. And President Biden's Small Business Administration delivered $50 billion to small businesses in fiscal year 2023, with a major increase in support for underserved businesses, including Black-owned businesses. Since 2020, the share of Small Business Administration's loan portfolio going to minority-owned businesses has increased from 23% to 32%. The number in dollar value of SBA-backed loans to Black-owned businesses has more than doubled since 2020. Then they talk about achieving record federal contract spending on small disadvantaged businesses. In 2022, the Biden-Harris administration awarded a record-breaking $163 billion in federal procurement opportunities to small businesses. This is why they said that. Okay, read the rest of that. Then they talk about the CHIPS and Science Act, supporting small and disadvantaged businesses through CHIPS Act funding. Okay, there's more you can read. I don't have time to get through all this. Read the rest of that. And okay, they also talk about supporting small and minority-owned businesses in clean energy industries. All right, so read that. And those are going to be some of the things Vice President Kamala Harris talks about, but also connecting people to the resources, telling them how to take advantage of resources already allocated. All right, now, let me post this link here also. Okay, so we got that. Read this article here from the Associated Press. This talks about a surge in wealth has boosted most U.S. households. This deals with what I was talking about, and dealing with African American wealth. A surge in wealth has boosted most U.S. households since 2020 and helped sustain economic growth. This is from the Associated Press, October 18th, 2023. October 18th, 2023. The part I want to focus in on, you can read the whole thing, but the part I want to focus in on is on the second page. It deals with how households net worth rose more on a percentage basis for Black and Hispanic households than for white ones. Where is this here? Hold on. Okay. Household net worth rose more on a percentage basis for Black and Hispanic households than for white ones. Though measured in dollar terms, the disparities remained wide. Yeah, we know, because you're dealing with 246 years of slavery and decades of Jim Crow segregation and redlining, housing discrimination, etc., things like this. The median net worth for Black households jumped 60%, but remained comparatively low at 45,000. Okay, but we see a 60% increase in median net worth of Black households. For Hispanic households, the figure surged to 47% to nearly $62,000. Among white households, median household net worth rose 31% to $285,000. So you want median net worth for African American households to increase so we can close that racial wealth gap. Is not about taking something away from white people. It's about increasing opportunities for African Americans. The Federal Reserve survey found that even as wealth inequality declined, income disparities worsened. Median incomes grew 3% compared with the previous survey, which covered 2017 through 2019. Okay. All right. But average incomes, which are swollen by the earnings of the wealthiest 1/10 of households, jumped 15%. Okay. Average incomes jumped 15%. The outsized gain among the richest households was driven by profits on stock and property holdings, as well as higher wages. So read the rest of this article here from the Associated Press. A surge in wealth has boosted most U.S. households since 2020 and helped sustain economic growth. Now, most of these policies Republicans are against, that created all this. Most of these policies Republicans are against. So it's not only about what somebody can do for you, a politician can do for you, it's also about protecting gains that have been made, and it's about blocking and stopping what people are trying to do to you. This deals with understanding political self-defense, which is a whole concept that I teach, political self-defense. Okay, now, last article. This deals with, I saw this piece from blackenterprise.com. Okay. A very good article. This deals with how a new book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from African Americans through unfair taxes post-slavery, unfair taxes after slavery ended. And I want to go to this article here. Let's see. This is at blackenterprise.com. Just a second. Let me pull this up here. Okay, this one right here. So this article came out April 24th, 2024. All right, let's look at this one here. Okay, let's close out this ad. Okay, a new book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from African Americans through unfair taxes post slavery, after slavery ended. And I've talked about this topic before, and I've talked about how there was an article from the Washington Post that dealt with how African Americans are overtaxed when it comes to property taxes by 13%. Historically, this is one of the ways that land was stolen from us, over assessing property value. Okay, over assessing, I should say, property tax responsibility, and then we can't pay the taxes. Then we lose our farm, lose our land. So this article is from April 24th, 2024. Andrew W. Carl, Kahrl, Andrew W. Carl, a professor of history and African American studies at the University of Virginia, put extensive research in his new book, which describes how U.S. bureaucracies created the nation's ongoing racial wealth gap by implementing a system of highly unjust municipal and state taxes. A system of highly unjust municipal and state taxes. Bloomberg reported the black tax, 150 years of theft, exploitation, and dispossession in America is the name of the book. Bloomberg reported that this book shares statistics, studies, and tales of African Americans being cheated out of land ownership, and pushed into poverty by racist laws and practices dating back to the Jim Crow era. Now, racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race. Racism is not about calling people racial epithets, calling people racial slurs. That's bigotry. Racism is the power structure. Racism is a system of advantage and privilege distributed based upon race, which comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Racism occurs when one race of people control the majority of the wealth, power, resources, privileges, benefits, land, access to opportunity, access to employment, politics, laws, political office, media, healthcare, education, etc. And this is designed to marginalize and subordinate and do harm to another race of people. This is what racism is. And this comes out of the ideology of European white supremacy. Okay. So this is totally different than calling somebody racial epithets. That's bigotry. Racism is the power structure. Quote, this history sheds new light on the forces generating economic inequality in America. The forces generating economic inequality in America and the racial character of those inequalities. Professor of History and African American Studies, Andrew H. Carl said. The book pairs personal stories with rich details about municipalities nationwide that used complex tax collection to fund distribution to white land and property owners. Okay. Details about municipalities nationwide that used complex tax collection to fund distribution to white land and property owners, and the economic dynamics spanning over a century of the United States history. Starting in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, and early 20th centuries, early 1900s, unfair tactics were used to doubly disadvantage Black landowners by artificially inflating property value estimates for tax collection. artificially inflating property value estimates for tax collection, overcharging them for their land, and exploiting their inability to pay as a means to seize their properties. Historically, this has been one of the ways that our land was stolen from us. Examples include Anthony Fleming and J.R. Rooks, two black men forced off their farmland by white supremacist mobs, who went on to establish a town with the goal of enabling Black Americans to own land. By 1911, Edmondson, Arkansas encompassed 30 square miles of stores, a bank, a hotel, and a post office for local Black homeowners. However, 20 years later, the town was no more after white plantation owners plotted to seize the land by imposing taxes on lots the Edmondson, Arkansas residents were unaware of. Once the residents failed to pay the taxes they had no clue about, the plantation owners seized the land. It was deeded over to one of the plantation owners who had concocted the scheme and demolished all of the buildings. In 1920, Hillary Thomas Stewart, Hillery, Hillary Thomas Stewart Sr., lost 24 acres of land in a tax sale, quote, under dubious circumstances, after the great-great-grandfather of George Floyd failed to pay $18.83 in taxes. George Floyd, who was killed May 25th, 2020 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Okay. In 1920, Hillary Thomas Stewart Sr. lost 24 acres of land in a tax sale under dubious circumstances after the great-great-grandfather of George Floyd failed to pay $18.83 in taxes. Losing the land forced the Stewart family into poverty. When looking at the 11 million acres of land taken from African Americans, it equates to $326 billion in today's dollars. Not to forget the millions in taxes African Americans have overpaid for a century. The millions of dollars that African Americans have overpaid over a century. From 1870 to 2020, African Americans were overtaxed by more than $27.5 billion in 2023 dollars. Professor Andrew Carl doesn't just focus on the grim findings, but he does share possible solutions to making up for the century of financial oppression against the African American community. He suggests the establishment of a federal fiscal equity program that mirrors Canada's approach, where funds are allocated to local governments based on their needs. He also suggests introducing a universal home tax exemption for numerous Americans, especially lower income homeowners or those residing in historically neglected areas. Another option would be to impose taxes on the wealthiest individuals in the U.S. Professor Carl says this is the past that we live with today. This is the past that we live with today. But it does not have to be our future. The name of the book, once again, is called The Black Tax: 150 Years of Theft, Exploitation, and Dispossession in America. The book was released on Wednesday. That would be Wednesday, April 24th, 2024, and retails for $35 through the University of Chicago Press. So be sure to purchase this book. I'm going to get a copy as well. purchase this book, read this article from Black Enterprise. .com. New book reveals how the U.S. stole $600 billion from Black Americans through unfair taxes post-slavery. Now, we've talked about this tax scheme before here on the African History Network show, and there's an article from the Washington Post that deals with how historically African Americans have been overtaxed when it comes to property taxes. This piece right here from WashingtonPost.com, Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. Unfair property assessments led to widespread overtaxation of Black Americans' homes. Now, we saw the same thing here in Detroit, okay, where homes in Detroit were overassessed by $600 million in property taxes, and many African Americans lost their homes. This piece right here is from July 2nd, 2020 by Andrew Von Dam, okay, for the Washington Post. And in this article, it says, state by state, neighborhood by neighborhood, Black families pay 13% more in property taxes each year than a white family would in the same situation. A massive new data analysis shows. Black-owned homes are consistently assessed at higher values relative to their actual sale price than white homes, according to a new working paper by economists Troop Howard of the University of Utah and Carlos Avenancio Leon of Indiana University. African Americans have long said they bear a disproportionate burden for taxes that support local police, schools, and parks, but nationwide measures of this type of systemic racism are hard to come by. Okay, now these are all laws and policies that have to be changed. These various loopholes have to be closed. To expose the structural and historical factors behind these discriminatory property tax assessments, the economists analyzed more than a decade of tax assessments and sales data for 118 million homes throughout the country. Okay, to expose the structural and historical factors behind these discriminatory property tax assessments, the economists analyzed more than a decade of tax assessment and sales data for 118 million homes throughout the country. In almost every state, property tax assessments were higher in areas with more African American and Hispanic residents. In city after city, the authors show it is not just differences in the buildings or land, but also the racial composition of the neighborhood that matters. The gap between white families and minority households remains large. The gap is 10%. When you combine data for Hispanic and Black households, the authors excluded California because Proposition 13, passed in 1978, drastically changed how property is valued there. Okay. All right. So read the rest of this article here from the Washington Post. Black families pay significantly higher property taxes than white families, new analysis shows. And when we look at the California Reparations Task Force, when we look at their report and we look at the 12 harms that they laid out, and I talked about this in my presentation that I did for the Detroit Reparations Task Force, the presentation I delivered March 2nd, 2024. And you can watch that lecture. It's on our social media platforms. It's on my Facebook page, The African History Network, and my YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep. And then we air it periodically. The Detroit Reparations Task Force laid out, the California Reparations Task Force in their 1,000-page report, they laid out 12 harms, okay? And they deal with the history that happened in California, the history that happened to African Americans in the United States, and they show how these 12 harms happened in the US, but also happened in the state of California. Then they lay out 115 policy recommendations to repair the damage. 12 harms detailed in the California Reparations Report that happened nationally and in California. Number one, enslavement. Now, we know in California, they've identified somewhere between 1,500 to 4,000 slaves, because California came into the Union as a free state in 1850. Okay, so the California does not have a deep history of slavery, but it does have a deep history of racism, housing discrimination, voter suppression, etc. So number one, enslavement. Number two, racial terror. Number three, political disenfranchisement. Number four, housing segregation. Number five, separate and unequal education. Number six, racism in environment and infrastructure. Number seven, pathologizing the Black family. Number eight, control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life. That deals with theft of royalties when it comes to music and different things like this, and how our artists were ripped off of their royalties. Control over creative, cultural, and intellectual life. Number nine, stolen labor and hindered opportunity. Number 10, an unjust legal system. Number 11, mental and physical harm and neglect. Number 12, the racial wealth gap. Okay. So read the California Reparations Task Force report. And their report is the most extensive study on African Americans since the 1968 Kerner Commission report. If you, okay, the full report is here. Let's see, let's go to this here. OAC.gov. And it's loading. Full California Reparations report. The executive summary is 74 pages. If you read the executive summary, you're going to get a huge education on this history and what's happened to African Americans across the country. But this is the full 1,080-page report, and they lay out 115 policy recommendations to address the harms that have happened. They have a table of contents here also. But when we look at the executive summary, now, variations of this happened all across the country. Variations of these harms happened all across the country, okay? So you can take these 115 policy recommendations. What needs to happen is really we need to shift the focus from talking about slavery in 400 years, shift the focus talking about that to present day structural inequities, and deal with the laws and policies put in place that created those structural inequities, and then trace that back to legacy of slavery if it dates back to that, but definitely it'll probably go back to the Jim Crow era, etc., early 1900s. And take these 115 policy recommendations and create versions of this at the federal, state, and local levels to start repairing the damage that's happened to us, okay? So we're going to have to, that is something that is much more doable and you can actually get put in place than thinking that you're going to get $27 trillion or 14 trillion, or that's not going to happen. And I told you, based upon Title VI of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, non-discrimination, fairly assisted programs, race-based policies are illegal at the federal level also. And very few people know that or actually want to acknowledge that. Okay, so this is why now in California, you have a similar law. So this is why in California, any type of reparations that are going to be distributed is going to be based upon lineage, because race-based policies in the state of California are illegal also. And they want to make sure, the California Reparations Task Force, they want to make sure that any laws that get passed, anything that gets put in place, they want to make sure it doesn't get struck down in court, because they know there are going to be legal challenges. If we look at this slide here, California's unprecedented reparations report details 150 years of anti-Black harm. 150 years of anti-Black harm. The report finds that the damage to Black communities is extensive, and that a variety of intentionally crafted policy, judicial decisions, and racism by private actors has created a widespread exclusion of African Americans that has not been sufficiently addressed at any level of government. Quote, almost 150 years of active, conscious federal, state, and local government action and neglect of duty have resulted in compounded harms that are unique to African Americans, the authors wrote in a draft reviewed by NBC News prior to its release. Okay, read this article from NBCnews.com, June 1st, 2022. This is when the preliminary, the 500-page preliminary report came out. Okay, so read that article there. California's unprecedented reparations report details 150 years of anti-Black harm. Okay, so hopefully you learned a lot on today's show. If you like this type of information, you can support the African History Network, $, the AHN show through Cash App, $, the AHN show through Cash App, also through PayPal, paypal.me/the AHN show. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. We have the information there as well, and register for the online history classes that I teach. We have our class on Saturday, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so this deals with thousands of years of history and what leads up to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. We teach the class on Saturdays, 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Next classes are Saturday, May 4th, May 11th, May 18th, and May 25th. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded. You can go back and watch it anytime. Okay. The class is on sale is on sale right now, $60. Regularly $60, regularly $130. The content is PG-13, so you can use this with your children also. We do the sessions live. All the sessions are archived and recorded, so you can go back and watch it anytime. And you scroll down the page, we have the class lesson plan here as well. So all the class lesson plan here for each class session is here. You can download the class lesson plan. Okay, so we go through and look at over 200 slides that I put together, 80 to 100 articles, the 15 books that we reference. You don't have to buy any of these books to follow along in class. I've been teaching this class since 2017. So I've been studying history 34 years. I put together this class as well as the second class that we teach, that we have starting up probably in June. Okay. All right. So register for that, and we'll see you in our next class. And I want to post this information here. Okay. All right. So remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right now it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda